Good day, I'm Nurse Aubrey, your student nurse from RTD of Fatima University, and today we will be assessing your neurologic system. So, before we assess the neurologic system of the patient, let me first sanitize first. So, in assessing the neurologic system of the patient, we would have to check, sir, So before assessing the neurologic system of the patient, I would like first to interview the patient about certain questions. So is that okay with you, sir?
Okay.
So first, do you experience any headaches, numbness, or tingling?
Hindi naman.
Do you experience any seizure activity po?
Hindi naman po.
How about dizziness, lightheadedness, or problems with balance or coordination?
Wala po.
Okay. So, next po, meron po ba kayong decrease in ability to smell?
Meron.
So, are there any ringings in the ears or change in visions?
Wala po.
Okay po. Next, difficulty in understanding when people are talking to you or when you talk to others? Okay. Next, do you have difficulty in swallowing?
Wala.
Do you have any loss of bowel control?
Ano naman po?
Okay. So, have you had any memory loss po or lapses na parang may nakakalimutan kayong ganito, ganyan?
Wala po.
Okay. Do you have any tremors?
Wala po.
So, sa past history po natin, meron po ba tayong head injury?
Wala po.
How about meningitis?
Wala rin.
Encephalitis?
Wala rin.
How about spinal cord injury, stroke, and stroke po?
Wala rin po.
Meron po ba kayong treatment na nare-receive today po?
Wala po.
Okay. So, sa family history po natin, may family history po ba tayo ng mga mabilis na high blood?
Wala naman.
Stroke?
Wala rin.
Alzheimer's?
Wala.
How about epilepsy po?
Wala rin.
Brain cancer?
Wala.
How about the Huntington chorea?
Wala.
Okay po. Next, lifestyle and health practices po natin. Meron po ba kayong any prescription or non-prescription medication po?
Wala po.
Okay. Next, smoking.
Hindi rin po.
Do you, sa work niyo po, ano po ba kayo? Nagwe-wear po ba kayo ng seatbelts or protective headgear?
Opo.
Diba? Tuwing mag-travel.
Opo.
Okay. Sa daily diet po natin, ano po yung mga kinain natin ngayong araw-araw? Do you eat proper foods po? Like, for example, proteins?
Yes po.
Okay. Next, exposure to lead, insecticides, pollutants, and chemicals. Do you have exposure to that po?
Hindi po.
Okay. Next is lifting heavy objects. Do you lift heavy objects, sir?
Sometimes.
Okay. So now, do you have any frequent repetitive moment? For example po, halimbawa, naglaba ka ngayon, tapos naisip mo maya-maya na, tapos ka na maglaba, tapos naglaba ka ngayon, naisip mo na, ay hala, hindi pa pala ako nakakapaglaba, tapos may realize mo, ay nagawa ko na pala kayo na. Okay. Next, what do you do on functioning daily activities? Ano yung ginagawa mo sa araw-araw?
Work. Exercise.
Okay. So, upon interviewing the patient, I have now collected subjective data from the patient. Now let's move on the assessment. So now I would assess the mental health of the patient by assessing his level of consciousness, observing appearance and behavior, observing mood, feelings, and expressions, and observe thought processes and perceptions, observe cognitive abilities. So in order to test that, I would now talk to the patient. So sir, how are you today naman po?
Okay naman po.
Can you state your name, age, and birthday?
Joy Mario Sala Binawana. 19 years old and birthday March 27, 2004.
Okay, so are you, what's your social status? Are you married, single, or
Taken.
I have noticed while talking to the patient and while I was interviewing the patient, I noticed that his level of that he is conscious. Next is that his appearance and behavior is also normal. His appearance is good and unique. while his facial expressions, feelings are also normal, and the patient is well. So for the thoughts, processes, and perceptions, as you saw earlier, I was talking to the patient and he was interactive with me. So now let's move on the cranial nerves. Okay, now let's move on the assessment of the cranial nerve. So now let's go and test the patient's cranial nerve 1 or the olfactory. So when we say the olfactory, this is the sense of smell of the patient. So how will I assess that? So now I'm gonna ask the patient to close his eyes. Then I'm gonna put something. Then I'm gonna So I'm gonna put something in front of his nose, and he should be able to identify what that is by his sense of smell. So sir, please kindly close your eyes po. Okay. So item number 1 would be, okay, sir, kindly smell.
Coffee.
Okay. So the patient has identified item number 1. Now let's move on item number 2.
Peanut butter.
Okay. Again, the patient has identified item number 2, which is peanut butter. The last one would be,
Alcohol.
okay, the patient has identified item number 3, which is ethyl alcohol. So now we're done with the assessment of the olfactory. Now let's move on cranial nerve number 2, which is the optic nerves. When we say optic nerves, this means that it involves our eyesight. So now how I'm gonna test the eyesight of the patient. So sir, what I want you to do is look at me in the eye, then close one of your eye. Left po muna, then I want you to not look on my fingers. Sasabi po ako sa inyo or magpapakita ko sa inyo ng numbers. For example, ganito. Huwag niyo kung titignan yung kamay ko. You need to identify kung ilan po yung finger na nakatap. Okay? Okay. So,
2, 4, 5, 3.
okay. Thank you, sir. The other eye naman po tayo.
3, 4, 2, 3.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So, now let's move on the assessment of the eye using the Snellen chart. So now we are assessing the cranial nerve number 2 or the optic nerves of the patient. So using the Snellen chart, I would ask the patient to identify the letters on the Snellen chart using both of his eyes, then one eye covered and the other. Okay, sir, now please read the Snellen chart.
E, F, E, F, E, P, O, Z, L, E, E, D, P, E, C, F, D, E, B, F, C, Z, E, F, E, L, O, P, Z, D, D, E, F, E, O, P, E, C, L, E, F, O, D, P, C, T, F, D, E, L, P, C, E, O.
Okay, so both of the eyes of the patient is good and is 100 is so both of the eye of the patient is good. So now let's test it on one eye. So sir, please cover your left eye po. And now read.
E, F, E, E, O, Z, L, P, E, D, P, E, C, F, D, E, D, F, C, J, P, F, E, L, O, P, J, D, D, E, F, T, O, T, E, C, L, E, F, O, D, P, C, T, F, D, P, L, P, C, E, O.
Okay, now the left side is also good, and now let's test on the right side. Sir, right side po.
E, F, P, P, O, Z, L, P, E, D, E, P, C, F, D, E, D, F, C, Z, P, F, E, L, O, P, Z, D, D, E, F, P, O, T, E, C, N, E, F, O, D, P, C, T, F, D, P, L, T, C, T, O.
Okay, so now we have tested the optic nerve of the patient. Now let's move on to the cranial nerve number 3 or the oculomotor. Now we'll be moving on testing the cranial nerve number 3, which is the oculomotor. Now, the cranial nerve number 4, which is the cochlear, and the cranial nerve number 6, which is the abducens. So, how am I gonna do that? I'm gonna do that by using a pen light to test the oculomotor of the patient. So, sir, please look at the pen light po and follow it without using your head, just your eyes. So here I'm looking for any abnormalities of the eye, like uncontrolled shaking, which I don't see right now on the patient. So now I'm gonna check the pupil reactivity of the patient. So the pupil should be 3 millimeter in size, and when strong in the light, it will be 1 millimeter in size. So the pupil should constrict to have the patient to have the pupil of the patient as normal. Okay, so now I'm gonna check for the pupil of your eye. So both pupil are light reactive and is constricting upon the stroke of light of the pen light. Okay, sir, now I'm gonna check po for your pupils again. So please follow this pen without moving your head po. Okay? So, okay, upon the assessment, the patient's eye are round, light reactive, and can accommodate distance, which means that the patient's eyes is normal. So that stands for the acronym PERRLA, which stands for PERL, or in other terms, what we call the PERLA method. So now, after doing the test on the cranial nerves number 3, 4, and 6, we will now move on assessing the cranial nerve number 5, which is the trigeminal nerve. Now we will be assessing the client's fifth cranial nerve, which is the trigeminal nerve. So this nerve is responsible for sensory reflexes on the face. So now I'm gonna start the assessment. So, sir, can you please bite down for me? Bite. Again. Okay. Now, I'm gonna test po for your, can you open your mouth with resistance po? Okay, open your mouth, sir. Again. Okay. So, that's it for the assessment of cranial nerve number 5. And since we're done with the cranial nerve number 6 earlier, we will now move on the cranial nerve number 7, which is the facial nerves. Now we are doing the assessment on facial nerve, which is the cranial nerve number 7. So, sir, now we will start with the assessment po. Can you please blink for me? Okay, again po, blink. Can you smile po? Okay. Smile po, sir. Okay, very good. So the patient did what I asked with ease, so that means that cranial nerve number 7 is okay and is functioning well and normal. So now we'll move on the cranial nerve number 8, which is the vestibulocochlear nerve. So now we'll move on the 8th cranial nerve, which is the acoustic or the vestibulocochlear nerve, which is responsible for our ears and our balance. So now we will start the assessment of the cranial nerve number 8. Now what I will do to the patient is cover one of his ears and then whisper something on the other to test his hearing. Sir, I'm gonna cover this one. I'm covering the patient's right ear, and I'm gonna whisper something on the left ear.
Love.
Okay. Next, I'm gonna cover the left ear and whisper something on the right ear. So,
Baby.
okay, so the patient has been able to tell what I said. That means both of his ears are functioning well. So that's it for cranial nerve number 8, which is the acoustic or the vestibulocochlear nerve. So now let's move on the ninth cranial nerve, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve. So the cranial nerve number 9 is responsible for the sensory function of your mouth. So mouth and throat. So now I'm gonna assess the patient. With that, I'm gonna need a tongue depressor and again a pen light for this procedure. Okay, sir, please say ah. Ah. Mm. Ah. So now I've already checked the patient's mouth and now I'm gonna initiate the gag reflex. So sir, please open your mouth. Sorry if I'm gonna poke you somewhere. So I'm sorry I'm gonna poke you, but I need a gag reflex. Okay. So now the patient's glossopharyngeal nerves are intact and is normal. So now let's move on. So now we'll be moving on the cranial nerve number 10, which is the vagus. So the vagus is responsible for our speech. So upon assessing the client earlier, I noticed that his vagus nerve is intact because he talked to me without hoarseness in his voice, and he is not having any difficulties in swallowing. So because of that, we will move on cranial nerve number 11, which is the spinal accessory nerve. To test the patient's cranial nerve number 11, which is the spinal accessory, I would like to ask the patient to move his head sidewards from left to right and then right to left. So sir, please move your head left to right and right to left. Okay, now move your head up and down. So now please try po to shrug my hands with resistance. So the patient was able to do that with ease. So that means the cranial nerve number 11 is normal and is intact. Now let's move on the cranial nerve number 12, which is the hypoglossal nerve. So now we'll be moving on and checking the patient's cranial nerve number 12, which is the hypoglossal nerve. So to check the patient's hypoglossal nerve, we will ask the patient to move his tongue from side to side. So, sir, can you please open your mouth and then stick out your tongue and try to move it from side to side? Okay, so the patient has done that with ease. That means that the hypoglossal nerve is intact and is normal. So that would be all for the assessment of the 12 cranial nerves. Now let's move on the motor and cerebellar systems. So now for the assessment of the motor and cerebellar system, I'm gonna ask the patient to stand up. Now we will be checking the motor and cerebellar system of the patient. Now we'll move on assessing his muscles. So sir, kindly please do this within 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, okay, now please grasp my finger with your stethoscope. Okay, so now upon checking the upper extremities of the patient, we will move on checking his lower extremities. So sir, please kindly lay down po. Okay, so now that the patient is laying down, I'm gonna ask him to please lift up one of his legs and then the other. So sir, please kindly lift up your leg po for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the other leg po. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So upon checking the upper and lower extremities of the muscles of the patient, I noticed that the patient is doing that activities with ease. So that means that the patient's muscles are normal. So now let's move on the next test. And with assessment of the patient's muscle, now we are gonna test for his coordination. So sir, can you please touch your fingers as quickly as we can po? Hindi, at yung one hand po natin. The other hand po. Okay, so now please touch your nose and my finger as quickly as we can. Okay, so now I am done assessing the patient's upper extremities on his coordination. Now we will test the patient's lower extremities on coordination. So sir, kindly please shake your hip like this po. And the other hip. Okay. Sir, so the patient has done the upper and lower extremity test on coordination. That means that his coordination is normal. So now we'll move on the patient's balance. So sir, kindly please stand up po for me. Kindly walk po to me. Walk po. Heel toe yung paglakad. Okay, so walk back, heel toe po, heel toe.
Di pa kasi lumalabas dito.
So upon checking the patient's balance and coordination, the patient has been able to do all the tests with this. That means that his coordination and balance is all right and is normal. So now let's move on the patient's sensory system. So for the sensory system, I would test the patient for tests like touch, pain, and temperature sensations. So for the first test, I would dump this cotton ball po on your face and on your body. And please tell me po if nararamdaman mo siya when it touches your skin. So please close your eyes po. Okay, so the first test, patient has done that with ease. Now let's move on the next test, which is by using this paper clip, I would ask the patient if he is feeling the sharpness or the dullness of the paper clip. So okay. Sir, mulat ka muna. So kapag dull, kapag sharp, ito yung nararamdaman mo kayo. Okay.
Sharp, 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 dull, sharp, sharp, dull, dull, sharp, 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 dull, dull, sharp, 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 dull, sharp.
Great. So again, the patient has done identifying the dullness and the sharpness of the paper clip with ease. So now let's move on the temperature test. So okay, now let's move on the temperature check on the patient. So I have here 2 glasses. The one has cold water and the other has hot. So now I'm gonna ask the patient to please close your eyes and identify kung ano po yung water na ilalagay ko on your left and right hand. So please.
Cold, hot,
Okay, another one po.
hot, cold.
Okay, So the patient was able to identify the hot and cold water upon touching his hands. Moving on the position sensation. Once again, I'm gonna ask the patient to close his eyes and please tell me kung saan position ko po dadating i-move yung fingers.
Up. Down. Up. Right. Left.
Okay, so the patient is able to do that with ease. So now I'm gonna test for the patient's tactile discrimination or the patient's fine touch. So what I'm gonna do is ask the patient to close his eyes and I will give him an object and he should identify that object while his eyes are closed. So sir, please close your eyes again and identify what object is this.
Bracelet.
Okay, another object po.
Sakit. Key.
Okay, so the patient has been able to do that with ease. Now let's move on the other examination. So it's supposed to be on checking the neurologic system of the patient. Should be able to assess the patient's reflexes, but because I don't have equipment like a reflexometer or a tuning fork, I won't be able to assess the reflexes of the patient. So it would be all for the neurologic system assessment. So thank you for participating in this assessment.